There's a reason no country on earth can truly challenge the United States. And it's not military strength. It's not technology. It's not even the size of the economy. Something far more quiet, far more invisible. Something most people will never see, even as it shapes their entire lives. The real power isn't in what America builds. It's in what the world is forced to accept. And once you understand how this works, you'll never look at money, trade, or global power the same way again. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you questioned what money actually is? Not how to earn it, not how to spend it, but what it fundamentally represents. Most people never do. They trust it. They work for it. They save it. And that trust, that blind faith in pieces of paper or numbers on the screen, is the foundation of everything. But here's the uncomfortable part. That trust isn't natural. It's manufactured, okay? And the country that controls how that trust is built controls everything. For most of human history, money was tied to something real. Gold, silver, something you could hold, something that had weight and scarcity. The king wanted to print more money. He needed more gold. That was the rule. It kept things balanced. It kept power in check. But what happens when that rule disappears? What happens when money becomes nothing more than a promise, a belief system? That's when the game changes. And in 1971, America changed the game forever. Most people have never heard of the Bretton Woods system. But for nearly 3 decades after World War II, it was the invisible architecture holding the global economy together. Every major currency in the world was tied to the US dollar, and the US dollar was tied to gold. $35 per ounce, fixed, guaranteed. If you held dollars, you could, in theory, exchange them for gold. That was the promise. That was the trust. And because America held the largest gold reserves on the planet, the world believed it. But behind closed doors, something was breaking. America was spending money it didn't have. The Vietnam War, social programs, Cold War commitments. The gold reserves were shrinking. Other countries started to notice. France, in particular, began demanding gold in exchange for their dollars. They saw the cracks. They didn't trust the promise anymore, okay? If enough countries followed, the entire system would collapse. So on August 15th, 1971, President Richard Nixon made an announcement. Temporary, he said, suspension of the dollar's convertibility into gold, just until things stabilized. Except it never went back. The link was severed permanently, and most people didn't understand what had just happened. They went to work the next day, bought groceries, paid bills. Everything seemed normal, but beneath the surface, the rules of the entire global economy had been rewritten overnight. Without gold backing it, the dollar became what's called a fiat currency. Its value came from trust alone. It's trust in the U.S. government, trust in the American economy, trust that others would continue to accept it. And here's the key, because the world economy was already built around the dollar, because oil was priced in dollars, because international trade ran on dollars. Countries had no choice but to keep using it. The system had momentum, and momentum in economics is everything. Think about what this means. If you're a country that needs to buy oil, you need dollars. If you want to trade internationally, you need dollars. If you want to hold reserves to protect your economy during a crisis, you hold dollars. It's not because the dollar is backed by gold anymore. It's because everyone else is using it. And if you step outside that system, you're alone, isolated, vulnerable. So you stay in, even if you don't fully trust it. Even if you resent it, you stay in because the cost of leaving is too high. This is the invisible empire. It's not built on occupation or force, but on necessity. On systems so deeply embedded that they become inescapable. The United States, whether intentionally or not, sits at the center of it all. Every time another country uses the dollar, America gains leverage. Every time a central bank holds U.S. Treasury bonds, America gains power. Not the loud, obvious power of armies. The quiet, structural power of indispensability. But power like this comes with a responsibility most people never think about. When your currency is the world's currency, your decisions affect everyone. When the Federal Reserve changes interest rates, it doesn't just impact Americans, it ripples across the globe. Emerging markets see capital flight, currencies collapse, debt becomes unpayable. And the people who suffer aren't the ones who made the decisions. They're farmers in Argentina, factory workers in Turkey, families in Lebanon, watching their savings evaporate. Here's where it gets darker, because the dollar is the global reserve currency. The U.S. can run deficits that would destroy any other nation. It can print money, borrow endlessly, and the world absorbs the cost. Other countries hold that debt, okay? Finance American consumption, American wars, American expansion. And in return, they get stability, or at least the promise of it. But what happens when that promise starts to crack? What happens when trust begins to erode? We're seeing the early signs now. Countries are slowly, quietly, trying to reduce their dependence on the dollar. China and Russia have been settling trade in their own currencies. The BRICS nations are exploring alternatives. Central banks are buying gold again, something they hadn't done at this scale in decades. It's not a rebellion, not yet, but it's a hedge. A quiet acknowledgement that the system might not last forever. And if enough countries hedge at the same time, the foundation starts to weaken. But here's the paradox. Even as trust erodes, the system persists because there's no real alternative. The euro is fragmented. The yuan is controlled by a government most of the world doesn't trust. Gold can't facilitate the speed and scale of modern commerce. And so the dollar remains, not because it's the best system, but because it's the only system. And that distinction matters. It means the power is real, but it's also fragile. It's built on inertia and the absence of better options. Let's talk about what this means for ordinary people. Because this isn't just abstract economics. It's your savings, your job security, your future. When the U.S. uses its currency dominance as a tool of foreign policy, freezing assets, imposing sanctions, cutting countries off from the global financial system, it sends a message. The message is clear. Play by our rules or lose access. And for a while, that works. But it also teaches the rest of the world a lesson, that the system isn't neutral, that it can be weaponized. And once that lesson is learned, the search for exits begins. Imagine you're a country. You just watched another nation get its entire economy cut off from the global financial system. Its banks isolated, its exports frozen. It's all because it was kicked out of SWIFT. It doesn't matter if you agree with the reasons or not. What matters is you saw how fast it happened, how complete the isolation was. And you have a chilling realization. Your entire economy is vulnerable to someone else's decisions. So, what do? You start building alternatives. Slowly, quietly, you create backup payment systems. You diversify your currency reserves away from just the dollar. You make contingency plans. It's not because you're trying to start a fight with America, but because you want to survive. This is the long game, and most people don't even see it happening because it's not dramatic. It's no declaration of war, no grand announcement. It's just a slow, methodical shift in how the world organizes its finances. It's my shift away from dependence and toward resilience. But what happens if this quiet shift suddenly accelerates? If enough countries decide the risk of staying in the dollar-based system is greater than the cost of leaving, we could be staring at the biggest economic transformation in a century. And let's be honest, that kind of change won't be smooth or painless. History shows us what happens when a global reserve currency loses its status. We see runaway inflation, crippling debt crises, and social unrest. Think about the British pound. It was once the world's reserve currency. After World War II, when it lost that status, Britain faced decades of economic decline. And that was a managed transition, with America actively supporting the process. If the dollar's decline is adversarial, happening amid geopolitical tension and mistrust, the consequences could be far, far worse. And here's the thing that really keeps me up at night. The people making these high-stakes decisions, the central bankers, the politicians, they're operating inside a complex system they didn't create. A system that evolved over decades through crisis and compromise. They're trying to manage something that is fundamentally unmanageable. Why? Because confidence, once it's lost, is almost impossible to get back. You can't print trust, can't pass a law to make people believe, okay? And if the world stops believing in the dollar, no amount of military power or economic theory will bring that belief back. So, where does that leave us? It leaves us in a strange and uncertain place, living in the twilight of an empire most people don't even know exists. An empire built not on land or armies, but on accounting, on trust, and on the invisible infrastructure of global finance. This empire could last another 50 years, or it could start to crumble in the next decade. The terrifying part, most people won't see it coming. The signs aren't obvious headlines. Catechal, they're boring, hidden in central bank reports, currency swap agreements, and subtle movements in the bond market. But you're not most people. You're here because you want to understand, because you sense that something deeper is happening beneath the surface of daily news cycles. And you're right, the world is changing. The balance of power is shifting. Not in the loud, dramatic ways we see in movies, but in quiet, structural ways that will reshape everything. How we trade, how we save, how we measure value, and how nations relate to one another. The question isn't whether America will remain powerful. It will. The question is whether it will remain indispensable. And that distinction will define the next era of human history, because you can challenge power, you can resist it, but indispensability, that's a different kind of control, okay? Once it's gone, it doesn't come back, okay? If this video made you think differently about money, power, and the invisible systems that govern our lives, okay? You're starting to see what most people never will. This is just the beginning of understanding how the world really works, the patterns, incentives, the quiet forces shaping your future. If you want to keep going deeper and truly grasp the architecture of modern power, stay curious and keep questioning. Answers are out there, hidden in plain sight, waiting for those willing to look. Thanks for watching, and be